Seattle Seahawks roster has undergone some significant changes over the last 72 hours, maybe the most chaotic 3-day stretch in recent memory for the Seahawks when it comes to personnel moves. Geno Smith traded, DK Metcalf traded, Ernest Jones, Jaron Reed re-signed, Tyler Lockett cut, lots of changes. The Seahawks now sit with the 5th most cap space in the league heading into free agency, which begins today. And who better to bring on and talk about the potential future, what's about to happen, and also what just happened over the last few days than Rob Staton of the Seahawks Draft Blog. He's going to give me his opinion on all of this, give you some ideas of what he thinks the Seahawks will do in free agency, some of the big names he thinks they'll go hunting on the offensive line, and also some potential draft fits, maybe some guys that could possibly fill DK Metcalf's shoes as the Seahawks now squarely in the middle of the wide receiver market as well. We're talking about it all with Rob Staton of the Seahawks Draft Blog coming up next.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
I just can't stop talking about doer made for doing because I can't stop wearing it. This is my favorite new apparel company, lifestyle apparel for every occasion. These stretch performance jeans right here are my daily go-to. They are 20% stretch woven into the fabric. They are breathable, antibacterial, made with sustainable materials. They move with you, and yet, you know, the moment you take them out of the package, they are built tough. They're built for doing. And right now, if you go to shopdoer.com, that's spelled D-U-E-R, they'll give you 20% off your first order for being a viewer of the program. If you go to shopdoer.com/forever, that's shopdoer, DUER.com/forever for 20% off your first order. All right, you guys, welcome back. Hit that like button. It really helps the show and helps the channel grow. It's one of the best ways you can actually help with the YouTube algorithm. Also, subscribe and hit that bell button so you're always notified of new episodes and live streams anytime I post new content on this channel. All the other ways you can support the channel are listed down below. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's get right into this interview with Rob Staton of the Seahawks Draft Blog. Does such a great job breaking down the draft all year long. It's amazing that I don't know if you guys understand this, but Rob is a full-time reporter. He reports on English football for the BBC. And this is a side gig. This is a passion project for him, and he puts as much time and effort into it as anyone out there. And his analysis is as unflinching and I believe as objective as anyone out there, but it also goes along with being really, really smart. So enjoy this conversation between me and Rob. So, Rob, I was really excited when we were finally able to link up our schedules and schedule this session to speak, but I thought we would likely be discussing the dawn of free agency being just a few hours away and possibly a DK Metcalf trade and what's going to happen with Geno because the deadline for his roster bonus is coming up. Lo and behold, we wake up and these moves have all happened. It's been the craziest 72 hours I can ever remember, really, when you talk about the breadth and scope of all these moves put together. And you've been at the forefront of many people that cover this team full time at being a proponent. Not specifically that you thought these moves needed to happen, but hey, let's be open-minded and consider the fact that in order to get from being a 9-10 win team to taking the next step, maybe you have to take a little bit of a step back. What's it like to wake up now and see that all this stuff is actually happening?
Well, I think it's exciting. You know, anytime that a team is on the lookout for a quarterback, has made a bunch of trades, you have 5 picks in the top 100 of a very interesting draft where day 2 is going to be deep and is going to have some interesting players available. You've suddenly got tens of millions of dollars to spend in free agency. You've got loads of money that you can use in 2026 as well. I think it's an exciting time to be a Seahawks fan. And with these moves in particular, this is what I would say about it. The Seahawks in the last 4 seasons, including the playoff defeat to the Niners a couple of years ago, they are 35-34. They have become a very average football team. They do not win enough games at home, and they've got 1 playoff win in 8 years. I think when you get to a point like this, yes, it's nice not to be as bad as a team like the Titans, let's say, or the Browns, or some of these franchises that are a shambles, but just sort of sitting in the middle ground on the periphery of the playoff contention all of the time is not somewhere that I want to be as a fan, and clearly it's somewhere that Seahawks ownership and the people running that franchise don't want to be either. I do think they needed some disruption this offseason, and specifically on these two moves. How many times have we said, this next defensive coordinator is going to unlock DK Metcalf?
Yeah.
This is going to be the year when he takes the next step. And guess what? It never happens. So if you don't want to wait for the next defensive coordinator to have a go at doing this, if you don't want to pay DK Metcalf $33 million a year, then you get what you can. And they've got a second-round pick in an area where the options are likely to be quite good in the draft. And then with Geno Smith, the thing I keep coming back to is if Geno Smith is as good as some people would have you believe, why didn't the Seahawks get more than the 92nd overall pick for him? Why wasn't there a bidding war? Why didn't we hear about the Titans and the Browns and the Steelers and all these other teams wanting to get into the mix to try and acquire Geno Smith? It sounds like the only person that was interested was Pete Carroll. Yeah. Because Pete's very fond of Geno Smith, and they only got a late third-round pick for him. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not some great end of an era. This isn't Russell Wilson being traded. This is just a team that has been in the middle ground for a long time, making some moves to try and get on a pathway to be better in the future.
When John Schneider sat on his radio show just last week, just a few days ago, and he talked about how these next 5 to 7 days are the most crucial period of the year because things are so fluid and you never know what's going to happen. You have to keep your head on a swivel and you have to be able to pivot when things happen that you're not expecting or that you don't like. Literally hours later, first we got news that DK had requested a trade, then the news that Geno Smith had turned down his contract offer and that potentially was on the market. Do you think when Schneider sat there and said those things, he knew this was about to happen? Because I felt like up until the last few days, I believed him. I thought that they intended to go into 2025 with DK Metcalf and Geno Smith on the roster, and then things suddenly changed in the last few days.
I think I'd probably lean more towards what you just said there than the opposite of them both being traded within a matter of a couple of days. But at the same time, I never really bought the idea that Geno Smith was going to be locked in, that Mike McDonald had been very positive. I think that was an overcorrection from a year ago where they went out of their way to not speak about Geno Smith. Everybody picked up on that and made it into a bit of a drama. And I think they thought, we're going to avoid all of that this year and we're just going to say he's the guy. And there's nothing to lose from that, really. If he ends up getting traded, you just say that the situation changed and you pivoted like John Schneider suggested they would do. So I didn't see this extent. If we were to go back to, let's say, last Tuesday, I was not thinking this is going to be the week that Geno Smith and DK Metcalf were going to be traded. But I did think this is going to be an interesting period to see how this plays out. Are they going to sign Geno Smith to a new deal? Is there going to be a compromise agreement, which was no guarantee? And I think as the time went on after the combine, you started to wonder, we've not heard anything here. If this was going to get done, it would presumably have been done right after the combine. So that starts to make you think, could Geno Smith move on? And then you have the bombshell of the DK Metcalf trade request. And it just seemed from that point, he was going to be on the way out. It wasn't going to be like a Myles Garrett situation that they were going to sort of turn around and come back to the table or anything like that after a period. So yeah, it's a seismic change for Seattle. They're going to look very different, but they've got a plan in place, as you said. They're going to pivot. They haven't pivoted into the unknown. It seems like there's quite a lot of clarity as to what they're going to do next.
We certainly hope so, right? Hope is not a plan is a saying that I have long since believed. But now we focus on what's next. And I want to come back to the quarterback, but let's start at wide receiver because now there's a significant gaping hole on the roster. Like we all love Jackson Smith and Jigba and the step he took last year, but then there's nothing else on this roster. How significantly do you think they'll attack this in free agency? Do you think, like, I don't like the top of this free agent class. I think there's a lot of potential pitfalls there. Do you think they'll sign someone significant, or do you think it'll be a case of looking for value in free agency because they have these other needs that we're going to get into in a second that are much more significant and have been for a long time, and then wait until the draft to adjust that position?
I think that's what it's going to be. I think it's going to be looking for value in free agency. I would like to see them pitch to Elijah Moore.
Elijah Moore, yeah.
Elijah Moore, because he was somebody I really liked in the draft, and I think he's had the misfortune of playing for the Jets and the Browns. So it's hard to judge him on that. He can get open. He might be better in the slot than outside, and that might be a little bit too much for Jackson Smith and Jigba. But I think he's a really good player, and his stock is probably low as a consequence of where he's played. He's 24 years old. I would take a chance there. And then the other thing I would say is, look at San Francisco's offense, and this is the offensive scheme that the Seahawks are going to use. Now, in the past, yes, it was obviously Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. They've been trying to trade Brandon Ayuk, and they have traded Deebo Samuel. And the rest of their receiver group includes Jacob Cowing, Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, the young players that they've drafted and developed. I think, given what's happened with Ayuk, it'll be a long time before the Niners throw massive money at a receiver again in the future. It's about getting a specific type of receiver onto your roster. I think that's what the Seahawks are going to do here. Now, it's not a great top-end draft for receivers.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to spend that 18th pick on a receiver anyway. I think this is we are going to be a trenches team. They are going to be a Harbaugh-style team moving forward. But you look at the options that are going to be there on day 2, early day 3. I really like Jalen Noel, really like Jack Bech. Jack Bech, to me, just seems like that kind of player that in a couple of years' time we'll all wonder why he went in the second round and it didn't go earlier. Trey Harris is going to be available a bit later on after he ran in the 4.5s. You've got Ty Felton, Jaden Higgins, Torrey Horton, Kyle Williams from Washington State, Jalen Lane. You can keep going down. Xavier Restrepo, Nick Nash. There's a whole bunch of receivers in this draft. So I think probably round 2 is a good area where they could target somebody. And then day 3, round 4 kind of range. Schneider's like to take receivers in that kind of range. You could double up on a couple of receivers, go and get a value receiver in the open market as well. I think that will be their plan moving forwards, because where the big investment's going to come is finally the offensive line, and that's the identity of what this team is going to be.
Now, you've been saying for months, all the way back into the college football season, as you started to look ahead to this offseason, that John Schneider finally needs to focus on free agency, the top end of free agency, to bring in established player or two to finally stem the tide and fix this offensive line. That's what he needs to do. Recently, your tone has changed, and you just hinted at it there, that you believe he is going to do it. This is something I've been a proponent of for the last couple of months as well. Why do you think this year is different?
I think there's a bit of internal pressure that this has gone on long enough. You need to do something about this, John. I think probably pressure on himself as well, that he's put in his own shoulders, that this can't carry on being this way. Pressure from Mike McDonald. Listen, we want to be a certain brand of football team here, and we can't do it with the offensive line that we had last year. This cost us wins. This potentially cost them games against the Giants, against the Packers, against the Vikings, against the Rams. Hey, we could have had a better record if it wasn't for this bad offensive line. So I think they're going to attack this, and I'd be very surprised if we don't hear some significant news on at least one offensive lineman at the start of free agency. And if you look back, people say the Seahawks don't spend in free agency. That's kind of true, but 2 years ago, first day, Draymond Jones, big signing. Mm-hmm. Last year, Leonard Williams, big signing very early in free agency. Yes, I know it was to retain him, but they paid him a lot of money and he was a free agent. I think there's going to be a similar splash this year. My hope is that it's Will Fries, the offensive lineman in Indianapolis. When I didn't know a lot about Will Fries other than he's a lineman and he's available about a couple of weeks ago. And then I went and watched his tape through Game Pass and was blown away by just how good he is. He is a perfect fit for the zone blocking scheme. He is somebody who will elevate this offense immediately if you sign him. And the brilliant Brady Henderson, who's completely switched on to what's happening with the Seahawks, tweeted out yesterday, he thinks they're going to target Will Fries. I think that will be a huge signing. If they can get him over the line, first and foremost, when that tampering window opens up, that'll be the offseason up and running for me, in terms of additions. That's exactly the kind of signing they need to make. And it's one that I would expect they're going to try and do.
What do you think the chances are that they don't stop there and they sign 2 recognizable, established names on the offensive line? Guys that fans will look at and go, okay, this really is different this year.
Well, if it happens, I'll be dancing around my office if they get a couple of players in. And the other one that people talk about is Drew Dahlman. He would be a perfect fit at center in the zone blocking scheme as well. It just seems as if there's just a little bit too much buzz about Chicago there.
Chicago, yeah, that sure is.
What I think is going to happen is I think they're going to try and sign someone like Fries. And if it's not him, maybe they'll pivot to other people. I kind of hope this doesn't happen because I think Aaron Banks has been quite an average player for the Niners, but he knows the offense. But maybe they pivot to something like that if they can't get Fries. I think Dalman maybe goes to the Bears. And then you've got to sort of then at that point look for the value. Ryan Kelly has played with Will Fries. He's not ideal. He's coming to the end of his career. He would have been ideal 5-6 years ago, but right now he's a player that can he play 17 games of football for you and potentially playoffs? Don't know. But you maybe need that experience to bring it in. Kevin Zeitler's still out there. He hasn't re-signed with the Lions. I was half expecting to see that over the weekend. Zeitler back with the Lions. It hasn't happened. He's another player that I'd have a look at there to get some experience in that line. So I'd love to see them make 2 signings. And if you could do Dalman and Freeze, let's get the champagne out. If it's Fries, if it's Fries and somebody else, then so be it as well. But I do think with the money they've got no choice now. Like, there's no excuses anymore. Even if it ends up costing a bit more than you're comfortable with, you have to address this and then set up the draft so that you can go and look at different areas and not feel like we have to take a lineman at 18, even if the value is not there.
Now, the consensus seems to be that Sam Darnold is the main target at quarterback. It makes a ton of sense. The Kubiak connection, West Coast, all of that. Late yesterday after the DK trade, there was some buzz coming out of Pittsburgh that they're going to be targeting Darnold. So maybe there's more competition there. How do you feel about Darnold? How do you feel about his ceiling potentially as a starter compared to Geno Smith? And if they're unable to get him, is it time to panic a little bit?
I wouldn't personally panic because I'm probably more of a... It's not even about being more of a fan of this draft class. I think narratives established quite quickly with positions in a draft. And people run with them and they're never prepared to pivot off those decisions that they've made. And I think it would have been completely fair in November to say, do you know what? I'm not too sure about this draft class. But then you do more work, you do more study, as the teams do. The teams do not end the season and think, right, we know everything we need to know about Jackson Dart or Tyler Shook or players like this. They have to go through the process. They meet these players formally or informally for the first time, Senior Bowl, Combine. They get to know these players. They get to see them do a workout. They get to see them throw. They get to dig around a bit more, find out a bit more about them. And evaluations change. As someone who didn't really spend much time studying Tyler Shook during the season, to then sort of learn a lot more about him and to feel the momentum that is completely with him right now. And the more and more work you do, I don't think it'd be the end of the world if you end up having to start someone like that early, if you're the Seahawks or anybody else. So I'm not panicking about anything. I think this is a draft class that has got potential starters in it. However, I think they are going to sign Sam Darnold. He has got familiarity with Clint Kubiak and the offense. This offense will share DNA with Minnesota's. He's had a decent year. And a lot of people were going, well, why have you moved on from Geno Smith to go to Sam Darnold? Darnold's younger. I'm guessing he's going to be cheaper in terms of how much you're paying him per year. He might be more willing to agree a deal that has flexibility for the Seahawks. So if you do draft somebody that you can move on, and Sam Darnold could be traded or could be cut or whatever, I think he will be happier in that arrangement. And then you look at some of the data behind him. Only Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson threw more big-time throws this season. When he had less than 2.5 seconds to throw, Darnold, his PFF grade was better than Geno Smith's. He ranked 14th in QBR, so middle of the pack, but Smith was 21st. Darnold was 9th for EPA. Smith was 14th. When you take away the low leverage passes in EPA, Darnold ranks 8th. Smith ranked 12th. So there are reasons there to think this is understandable why you would pivot to Sam Darnold. There are negatives as well. The last 2 games of last season were an absolute horrendous mess.
Sure.
And he threw too many turnover-worthy plays. He led the NFL in that regard because he is a gunslinger and he will take chances. But I think that's kind of what John Schneider wants at the position. Yeah. So I have no problem with this. And Dan, I think when you don't have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, et cetera, I think you have to take numerous bites of the apple. You have to be prepared to say, we're going to see if Sam Darnold can be the guy. but we're also going to draft a quarterback. And last time they did this, it led to Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty optimistic about the situation at quarterback, frankly.
Well, and you brought up Patrick Mahomes. I was just reminding someone just a little bit ago who was trying to convince me that there's no quarterback in this class worth being aggressive to take, to your point earlier about narratives and how they stick. And I had to remind him that back in 2017, a lot of people thought the Chiefs were nuts for moving from 27 to 10 to take this raw gunslinger who had, inconsistent, weird mechanics, who played in a gimmicky air raid offense in college that didn't translate. Like, it's funny how quickly we forget those things because we see the end product, right? Let's assume for a moment that everything that we just talked about comes to fruition. The Seahawks go out and they sign Ryan Kelly and Will Fries, or Drew Dahlman and Will Fries, whatever. Boom. They attack the offensive line in a way that shocks most of the 12th man. And they sign Sam Darnold. Do you think at that point they still are aggressive in drafting a quarterback? Is 18 still in play there?
Yes, I think it is still in play. I think people need to get their head around this, and I think it's a distinct possibility. I think that Jackson Dart is going to go a lot earlier than people think. For what it's worth, I think Shedeur Sanders might go quite a bit later than people think.
Yeah.
But I think Jackson Dart has convinced teams with the way that he threw at the combine, and I think they've just there's a lot of analytical positive data around Jackson Dart to make you think projectable positivity about where he's going to be. And you have too many teams in this league who need a young quarterback for him to last deep. But if he's there at 18, I think he's an option. I'd keep an eye on Shook. He just seems to have all of this momentum with him right now. Yeah. And he's gone from being this, well, he's a bit older and he's had a few injuries, but he's kind of got an arm in somewhat intriguing kind of guy to, I listened to every interview that he did at the combine because I don't have no life. And he just jumps off the screen. And the last time this happened, it was JJ McCarthy a year ago. And he ended up going in the top 15. And people forget this. If we go back 12 months prior to the combine in 2024, people didn't think Bo Nix was a first-round pick.
Right.
People were unsure whether Michael Penix was. And people were really mixed on JJ McCarthy. They all went in the top 12. So these players rise. And I'm telling you that there are going to be a bunch of teams out there that look at Tyler Shook and go, arm talent, athleticism, experience, character through the roof, our kind of guy. And he is John's type of guy, I'm telling you now. And they're going to think, I can win with this. We can take a chance on this player. And it would not surprise me if he was off the board in the top 10. It would not surprise me if he was an option at 18. Yeah. It will also not surprise me if he's early second round. But he's going to go earlier than anybody thought a few months ago. And can I just make this point on what you were saying there? Because you just touched on a really interesting point that people don't really remember here. We almost act sometimes like, well, Patrick Mahomes was always going to be the world's best quarterback, or Josh Allen was. And then when you go back to those drafts, that's not what the analysis about those players was at all. So, for example, do you know that in Lance Zierlein's grading for quarterbacks...
I was looking at that this morning too.
So he had Mitchell Trubisky, Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Kaiser ranked ahead of Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. He gave Patrick Mahomes a 6.3. Nathan Peterman had a 6.3 grade.
Yeah, so, will eventually be plus starter.
Yeah, so the grading on Mahomes was nowhere close to what he's emerged. Josh Allen, a year later, he had Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and Josh Rosen ahead of Josh Allen. And Lamar Jackson, who shared a 6.4. Josh Rosen had a 6.7. Now, I love Lance Zierlein. The point here is not to hammer Lance Zierlein. It's to show
he wasn't alone. Yeah.
That when you go back to these draft classes, players have been graded in a way. For example, Malik Willis had a 6.42. That's a higher grade than Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen received going into the draft. And then there was Daniel Jeremiah's big board before the 2017 draft. I think it had Patrick Mahomes wasn't even in the top 50 a month before the draft. And then in his final mock draft, he had Mahomes in the 20s. In his last mock draft, he finally put him in the first round in like the 25th, 26th pick or something like that. So the good or great quarterbacks are not often the ones that are obviously going to be good and great. They're the ones that have got traits and developed properly. And that's what the Seahawks have got to look for.
Yeah, the minute Shuck ran his second 40, right, to try and beat his first one, he's one of only 3 guys out there running a 40 at the quarterback position anyway. And then they interviewed him afterwards, and he said, "Hey, I've been looking forward to the combine my entire career. Like, you only get one shot at this. I came out here to compete. I don't care if I fail." In that moment, I thought, okay, he's going to be pretty high on their draft board, right? And then, as you said, Jackson Dart to me just drips Schneider traits left and right. So I could see that. Quinn Ewers is someone that you and I agree. We've talked about this several times on the show before, that Schneider may have been aware of and had his eye on for quite some time, that he fits a lot of the things Schneider's looking for. My only hesitation now with that is I've watched more of the interview process with him, and reportedly he did great in his interviews in Indianapolis, although we hear that about just about everybody, right? He has such a laid back demeanor. And I don't know if that really screams Schneider to me, but you believe that if they wait a little bit and take a quarterback later outside the first round, that Ewers would be a good fit. Why?
Well, I think there's 2 tiers. I think you have the first tier, which will include Dart and Shuck potentially as an option, maybe for the first round for the Seahawks. And then I think in the second round, that's when the players like Quinn Ewers and Will Howard come to the table. I think you're right to say that Ewers is quite laid back. I don't see that as a problem. I think he is somebody who has been through a lot and has just learned that you need to be there. You know, it's no good being here and it's no good being here. You've got to be there. And I think he's mastered that. And I think his mental state is probably in a very strong place as a consequence of that. The difference between him and Dart and Shuck is they just fire the ball out with just that little bit more velocity. Like, Ewers has got a very pretty deep pass. He can get the loft. Like, if you watch the deep balls at the combine, Dart's throws are quite flat.
Yeah.
They get distance, but they're flat. Ewers has got that moon ball that Russell Wilson has.
A little bit of Russell Wilson in him, yeah.
And when you throw it deep, you need that loft. It can't be flat. You've got to give your receiver a chance to get downfield, track the ball, and adjust. If it's a flat throw, it's probably just going to go sailing over the head. So that's one thing that the Seahawks will look for there. Nobody watches Ewers' tape and says this is a flawless prospect. Right. But what you have to remember here is he had abdominal issue with an oblique. He had a bad ankle. His QBR completely dropped off right after he came back from that injury. He came back far too soon because he knew it was his last year at Texas. Before he had that injury, his QBR was in the 80s. And then once he'd 5 games into his return, it returned back to the 80s. His QBR was very good during the playoffs as well.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be remembered. The biggest problem with Quinn Ewers is his ability to stay healthy. It's yes, there's some mechanical issues. He's thrown off his back foot. He lifts his back foot. It's kind of strange. He needs to work on that. He has worked on that. You can see it at the combine. But there are reasons to think this guy who was a child prodigy, who was going to be the next Trevor Lawrence back in the day, has intrigued GMs for a long time. And now they get a chance to take him, perhaps in the second round where there's less pressure on him to actually be the guy, to bring him in, to try and develop him, to try and unleash the potential that he's always had. He's been working with Mike McCarthy, who is very, very close to John Schneider. So they'll be getting good intel there. I think if they don't take a quarterback in the first round, 50 or 52 could easily be Quinn Ewers.
And I think he fits the timeline if that were to be how it plays out. I think he turns 22 like a week from now. So even if you did bring in a Sam Darnold and he's, plays well for 2 or 3 years, I think that would play into that Jordan Love kind of Green Bay timeline that certainly John Schneider saw when it was Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers while he was in Green Bay. As far as, let's talk about the defensive side of the ball for a minute. First of all, Ernest Jones, 3 years, $33 million, only $15 million guaranteed after it appeared that if you were a good middle linebacker in his mid-20s in this league, you were going to sign the standardized 3-year $50 million deal with $30 million guaranteed. We'd seen 3 of those deals handed out over the last week. We know he wanted to be here. He said it himself, but my goodness, were you shocked at how team-friendly those numbers appear to be?
I was very surprised by the guarantees because we'd seen so many linemen from Zach Bourne initially to the guy in the Jets, Sherwood, and Nick Bolton that were getting similar kind of contracts. And this was half the guarantees. This was considerably lower. And although it's been billed as it's X amount per year, and wow, he's in that ballpark with these other guys, the fact that the guarantees are low means that the cap hits can be lower. So this is a player who bounced around a bit. He's with the Rams, he's with the Titans, then he's with the Seahawks. He never went anywhere for a premium pick in that. He's had a bit of a knee surgery thing over the last few weeks, apparently.
Yeah.
So that obviously impacted his value. But I think it's great news for the Seahawks. They've got him back on a price that makes sense for them. Getting Jaron Reed back's a really good piece of news as well. And the good thing about this Ernest Jones thing is, you with him and Tyrese Knight, neither of them are earning so much and neither of them have cost so much that if a really good player like Jihad Campbell lasts to number 18, you can take him if you want to. And he's a game changer. He is somebody. I've got my horizontal board. Yesterday I wrote the order in which I would put those players. I'm going to publish that after free agency. Okay. I've got Jihad Campbell as the 6th best player in this draft. So if someone like that lasts to 18, you can take him and you can find a way to use the 3 of them. It's very simple. So I think the Seahawks are in a great place there. This is a really good start to free agency to get this Ernest Jones deal done, to get the Jaron Reed deal done. And they just need to go and get some offensive linemen now.
Yeah, unlike last year, all the guys that were restricted free agents, unrestricted free agents that they wanted to keep in the fold, you can make the argument that they're done. That there might be a couple here and there at the bottom of the roster that they want to tender at the lowest amount, but that all that work is done. So what happened last year where they were focused on Leonard Williams, at least they claim, and so it cost them the opportunity to keep Jordan Brooks. We'll never know how serious they were about that. We don't have to worry about that this year. 100% of their focus can be on this free agent class. Now, with that being said, as aggressive as you believe they're going to be on the offensive line, and with all the cap space they have, not just this year, they're 5th, I think, currently in available cap space, but number 1 in 2026. So you can structure some contracts that way. Do you expect that they might make a significant move on defense? A guy like Jonathan Allen or a big name over there to help? And the only reason that I even consider asking that is we now know that they attempted to get Max Crosby a few days ago. And so that would show that in some respect, they are open, if they could clear those 2 salaries, of adding a big price, big name to the defensive side of the ball, even understanding that they're also going to try to fortify the other side.
Well, there was a little bit of a rumor a year ago that they tried to sign Bryce Huff before he went to the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's pretty clear that Mike Macdonald wants depth on the defensive end position, because they were quite aggressive to keep Darrell Taylor a year ago. They didn't give him his restricted free agent tender. They kind of did a new deal, $3 million. And obviously they had a Nwosu, and they had the 2 second-round picks on the roster. And as soon as they moved off Darrell Taylor, they were quite aggressive to get Travis Gibson in for a rental situation. And they want 4 pass rushers. Now, right now, they've got the 2 second-rounders still, Maffei and Hall. Nwosu has been injured for the last couple of years. They're trying to they were trying to rework his deal. There's not as much pressure to get that done now as a consequence. But he's going to be an injury question mark. So they need to bring another pass rusher in. Now, I wonder whether that could be in the first round. I think I've been mocking for a couple of weeks now that Donovan Izaraku from Boston College, to me, feels like a perfect Seahawks pick in terms of character, production, and agility testing. We need a 10-yard split from him. Hopefully, he does a run at his pro day so we can get that. But he's the kind of guy that they take, and maybe he is someone that they would draft. But there is part of me that wonders: are we going to see them potentially just throw the hat into the ring for a Josh Sweat, and surprise everybody in that regard? Or here's the other thing we've got to remember here is we're looking at a draft with a lot of defensive line options.
Yeah.
And that could impact the defensive line free agents. So it might not be that the first domino to fall is Seahawks have signed a pass rusher. I imagine that's going to be someone for the offensive line. A couple of days in, though, if someone's not getting the market that they're looking for, the Seahawks might jump in there and go, okay, we'll beat anybody else and we'll bring you in. I think there's definitely a chance that could happen. It's hard to sort of know who that would be, but I do think there's a possibility of it. And then I think the safeties in free agency are very interesting. Like there's a decent group of safeties. It starts with Trevon Moehrig from the Raiders. Apparently, he's going to get about $12 million a year. I think this feels very reasonable for a player of his quality. He could be an option. Justin Reed from the Chiefs could be an option. Tafunga from the Niners could be an option as well. Somebody I really like going into the draft. I just wonder if they'll dabble in that market because Rayshawn Jenkins is gone. And I know a lot of people think they might go after Nick Emenwari. Maybe they will. But maybe they'll also look at these free agent safeties and think, well, let's just address that need now and free us up to do something else in the first round. So I would imagine that could be a possibility that, O-line will be the priority, but they'll have their ear to the ground on the pass rushers, and I think they may do for the safeties as well.
And then before I let you go, any kind of under the radar, lesser known, more affordable options out there in free agency that you think could provide good value that you seem to feel like would just be a really good fit?
Well, we talked a little bit about Elijah Moore. I think a couple of other players that I would mention. Brandon Stevens, the cornerback in Baltimore. He is somebody that a couple of years ago, he had a very good season under Mike Macdonald, and then Macdonald leaves for Seattle, and he had a bad season last year. Perhaps he needs Mike Macdonald's guidance. Maybe Mike Macdonald thinks, I can get this guy back to his 2023 level. The Seahawks need depth at cornerback. Yeah. He may not be that expensive to bring in. So do you bring him in to compete with Reek Woolen? I don't think Mike Macdonald trusts Reek Woolen. I think everybody's enamored by his physicality, and not his physicality, his athleticism, I should say, because physicality has not been a calling card for him. His athleticism. But I think bringing somebody in to challenge him is important. So I think Brandon Stevens could be a guy. I think another cornerback to look at is Isaiah Rodgers for the Eagles. Did a very good job filling in for Darius Slay when he had to last season. He is not somebody who you're going to sign to a mega contract and anoint as the starter, but as competition on a decent deal, I could see someone like that coming in as well. And then I think you've got to look for the value areas. Like, is James Daniels, is his market going to be affected by an Achilles injury that he's still recovering from? Yeah. If you're looking for a cheap receiver, Marquez Valdez-Scantling had an unbelievable 4-game stretch under Clint Kubiak for the Saints. So you could bring him in and say, look, it worked for a bit under this offensive coordinator. He provides a bit of depth and competition there, so you give him a camp. So I think they're the kind of things I would be looking at there. But I'm excited, man. I just think it's the kind of thing the Seahawks needed. And I know there's half the fan base seems to be where I am. Maybe less than half, maybe more like a third, seem to be mourning about what's happened over the last few days. And I just don't think it's worth it, because as I said before, for DK Metcalf, $33 million a year is a lot for a player who we seem to spend every year wondering if this is going to be the year he finally takes a step forward, and you've just moved on and you've got a decent deal for him. And then with Geno Smith, if you were going to say that he's the top 10 quarterback, he's great, he's fantastic, he's a franchise quarterback, then there would have been a lot more interest than just the Raiders in Geno Smith.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of right down the middle on this, between the head and the heart. Like I expected both those players to still be on the roster when the season started. I wanted them to be on the roster just because I thought that was the best alternative at both those positions for where this team is right now. But the second it became reality that these moves were made, I immediately switched over to, I get so juiced about this kind of stuff in the off season. And I probably spend more time thinking about the off season during the season than I do thinking about the season during the off season, if that makes any sense. Just this entire process. And now, and I have to believe this too. Like, this is fun for John Schneider. I mean, this is what GMs are built for, right? This is what they get into this stuff for. As much as he might have wanted those guys to be on the roster, like, he's waking up. He's not sleeping right now. He's already up. He's juiced. He's ready to get going.
If I wouldn't be asleep, I hope he's not asleep. I hope he's putting the finishing touches to a contract for Will Fries. But I think he is going to be juiced. He's going to be excited, and I think it is something. It is something to be happy about that the Seahawks have 5 picks in the top 100, because what you're going to see with this draft is the teams in the top 10 are not going to be happy. This is why you're going to see Cam Ward may well be the first overall pick or the second overall pick. Cam Ward in a typical draft would be nowhere near the top 10. He is not a flawless quarterback prospect. He's got a second round grade on my board, but he's going to go very early because teams need that. Yeah. And there's not the Myles Garrett sat there waiting to draft first overall. So that's what it is. So teams in the top 10 are not going to be happy with their value.
If Shadur Sanders does fall, if he has an Aaron Rodgers type fall, do you like him as a fit if he's there at 18?
I don't like him as a fit. I don't think he's going to be a John Schneider. I think there's just too much. There's too much there, man. Like you can watch his tape, and there are good aspects to it. He throws a very pretty pass, very catchable ball. he has got that little bit of magic about him sometimes. Certainly can take a hit and deliver a pass. He sacks himself way too many times. And, he was sacking himself at a rate that would have made Caleb Williams blush. So, you just cannot live in that world. And I think that will get worse at the next level. And then you have, I just was so, like, he's there, he's got the jewelry on, he's just like lounging around at the combine. They're interviewing him. How does it feel? It's great to be here at my first combine and my only combine. I was like, what are you talking about, man? Like, you're not doing anything at the combine. You're just them arsing about, with your friends. Like, it's not, get out there and throw. Like, let's see you throw. He's not done anything at the Shrine Bowl, the combine. He's walking around like he's Trevor Lawrence. Like, maybe he's been told he's going to go in the top 2 and it doesn't matter. And then you've got the aspect of, if anything ever goes wrong, that Prime is going to have his say. That Prime is going to be very opinionated about that. And I just don't see the Seahawks wanting any part of that. I think they want someone who is going to be completely, head in the playbook, head down. They want someone who's like Tyler Shough, essentially. His personality is what they're looking for. Yeah. Someone's going to take a chance on Shedeur. I don't think it's going to be the Seahawks.
Well, we'll find out. I appreciate you taking the time over there, early morning over there, way earlier morning here, though. I hope I get some credit among my viewership that I was up.
You deserve it.
To talk to you.
You deserve the credit.
Always good to talk to you, and it was actually great that the timing worked out the way it was, because I couldn't wait to get your insight on some of that stuff. We'll have to get you back on and as we get closer to the draft and do a deep dive there.
Dan, you do a great job. Thank you for the invite, and anytime. Thank
you, Rob. As always, right back at you. We'll talk soon. Well, buckle up, Seahawk fans. It's about to get fun. Maybe the most anticipated free agent period in John Schneider's 15, now 16-year career. Here's what's coming up for me today. First of all, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. I will be online and tweeting throughout the day. I'll be away from my studio all day, but if anything massive should happen today, and I do expect this to happen, still keep an eye on the channel. Good reason to hit that bell for notifications, because I'll react to it from wherever I am. I'll go live from Starbucks if I have to, or do a quick hit from my car, or out in some in front of a cactus somewhere here in Mesa, and give you my quick reaction. And then tonight, probably 7:30 p.m. Pacific time. Let's call it that. 7:30 p.m. Pacific time tonight. I will go live. I will be on as long as I have to be to get all your questions and comments and react to everything that happened during the day today. And then we will cap it off tonight with a live 7-round mock draft using not only the benefit of knowing maybe some holes have been filled in free agency, but also with all the new picks acquired in all the moves the Seahawks had made. Thank you so much for viewing. We'll talk to you very, very soon. Follow me on Twitter, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. Forever and always, go Hawks.